Before we do example 2, we're going to take a look at this chart right here, which is the signs of your trig functions. Now you don't necessarily have to memorize it, but let me go over with how we got the signs in each one. One thing we want to remember is sine is the same thing as our y values, cosine is the same thing as x, and tangent is this y divided by the x. So if we think about it, our sine, our cosine, and our tangents in terms of y's and x's, it helps us determine which ones are positive and which ones are negative without having to memorize this whole table. So for instance, if I'm looking in the first quadrant, I know my x is positive, which means my cosine is positive, and I know my y is positive if I take a point in here. If I go in the second quadrant, now I'm going in the negative x direction, which means cosine is negative, and I'm going in the positive y direction, which means sine is positive. If I look in the third quadrant, again I'm going in the negative x direction, so cosine is negative. And now I'm going in the negative y direction, which makes sine negative. In the fourth quadrant, I'm going in the positive x direction, which makes cosine positive, and the negative x or y direction, which makes sine negative. And then to think about your tangent, if we have our sine and our cosine to be the same, it's going to be positive. If our sine and our cosine are opposite signs, one negative, one positive, here and here, then we have tangent to be negative. And then again in the third we have a negative and a negative, which makes tangent positive, and opposite signs in the fourth quadrant make tangent negative. So when you're trying to think about whether sine, cosine, tangent should be positive or negative, think about your x's and your y's in terms of the quadrant. So now let's go ahead and look at example 2. It says determine the quadrant in which the terminal side of theta lies. So here we have cosine of theta is less than 0 and tangent of theta is greater than 0. So we're going to draw out our quadrants, and we're going to think about when is the cosine less than 0? Well, remember the cosine is the same as our x. So cosine is negative in this part when x is negative, which means these two quadrants are when the cosine is negative. So we can say that it will not be in these two where the cosine is positive. Then it says tangent is greater than 0. So we need to figure out, is the tangent bigger than 0 here or positive or here? Well, here we have a negative and a positive in quadrant 2, which would make tangent negative. And in quadrant 3, we have a negative and a negative, which makes tangent positive. So we can cancel out that one, giving us an answer of quadrant number 3. We'll do one more. Let's take a look at letter B. In letter B, it says that the cosecant of theta is less than 0. So let's think of its reciprocal. If the cosecant is less than 0, the sine is its reciprocal. The sine of theta then would also have to be less than 0 because reciprocals have the same sign. So if that's the case, sine of theta is less than 0. That means we need something where our y value is negative, which is down here. So we can get rid of these top two quadrants. Then it says cosine of theta is less than 0. Well, here's the cosine positive because x is positive, and here cosine is negative. So we're looking again at quadrant number 3. Next, I want you to try this, so go ahead and pause it. Unpause it when you're ready to check your answer. If you did number 1 correctly, with the cotangent, remember you want to think about the tangent, which is its reciprocal, and think about that being greater than 0. And then the sine is also greater than 0. So if tangent is greater than 0, we can cross out these two quadrants. And if sine is greater than 0, we can cross out the third quadrant. Oops. Which gives us an answer of quadrant number 1. If you have questions, let me know.